Hey everyone, hope you guys are doing well. Welcome back to FPL Fran and today's video, which is going to be the Game Week 37 Team Selection. For this week, of course, the biggest double game week of the season, we have saved our bench boost. I think around 85-86% of players remaining do still have the bench boost, just looking at the metrics from the top 10K, top 100K. Not so sure about the top 1 million, obviously, but I assume that most managers have kept the bench boost so far. Some people might even have additional chips like the triple captaincy left, maybe the free hit as well. But of course, we've been planning for this bench boost, and that was, of course, part of the reason why I took a minus 16 2 weeks back. And it sort of worked out well in the sense that I've arrived at Game Week 37 with 2 free transfers here and have the opportunity to sort of make the best, most informed decisions. The most interesting thing about this week, I would say, is the availability of potential Newcastle players. So, of course, Trippier is fully back in training now, apparently. But I still think, so long out, it's so unlikely that Trippier is going to play 2 fixtures, particularly start 2 fixtures. He might obviously come off the bench versus Brighton and then start versus United, which I think is actually the most likely scenario. However, if there's ever a world where Eddie Howe does confirm a start for Trippier, I will change my plans. That's just a little bit of a disclaimer, but I think it's very unlikely. As far as Nick Pope, I think it's a little bit of a different situation for goalkeepers, right? Because match fitness is probably a little bit different for goalkeepers. Either you're, I think, in shape, ready to play mentally as a goalkeeper, or you're probably not. I think a good example, of course, is the situation with Alisson earlier this season, where he was out for a while, not necessarily out as long as Nick Pope, of course, but you either start or you either don't play. And that's really how it works for goalkeepers. I don't think that Eddie Howe would necessarily need, for example, lied to us on the availability of Pope. I think if someone asked the question straight up, if Nick Pope is ready to start the game versus Brighton and he confirms yes, my transfer plans will also change and I'll be much more confident about going for Pope. So with that in mind, let's just get started with the video. Game week 36, of course, as a review of that, was very, very good for me. So I was very fortunate to have a very good game week, probably my best game week in a while. Obviously, for anyone who's been following the videos and honestly my team this season, things have, of course, gone off the rails since game week 30, I would say, where I was still around 300 something in the world. And unfortunately, of course, with the culmination of game week 34, have continuously plummeted until the recent sort of bounce back here in game week 36, where we got 123 points thanks to a couple key differentials, but also just keeping some of the players that we were very confident about heading towards in the season, which would have been Arsenal players, whilst also hedging towards some of the doublers in Chelsea, in City, and also Newcastle. So I played Gordon over Son. As I mentioned, that was the main dilemma last week. I'm glad that actually when it came to the outcome, Jackson did incredibly. He was never one that I considered benching, but it was definitely between Gordon and Son, and I feel like Isak has robbed us slightly, but I won't talk about that too much. I think I've whined a little bit too much. But it also proves that, of course, going back to Newcastle, where yes, they've been awful this season, but when you get a chance to face a team of the level of Burnley, and they really will have the same opportunity this week when they face this really, really terrible United team, given the injury state that they have and given that the results that they've actually been showing on the pitch, I'm quite excited, of course, of getting the chance to have Gordon as well, given that he also has a home game, right, sliced in between. Flecken was the savior of the week for me in terms of being a complete differential. Obviously, some people had Petrovic. On the other hand, of course, some people might have had Pickford or Ederson, who didn't do so well in terms of keeping clean sheets. So just in general, very happy with the team. And of course, when you look at the back of the bench, these are the players that are a little bit more suspect for me. Even going back to this week, Flecken is probably one that I could consider leaving my team as well. Arsenal, I'd like to keep until game week 38. The same with City, just because we do tend to see, of course, teams that have something to play for will obviously have this sort of hidden impact of being a lot better. Now, of course, not every team that's quote unquote on the beach is on the beach performance wise, but that's something that I think we can put a little bit more faith in, right? When we talk about teams like Arsenal, City, and then also some teams who are still vying for European slots like Chelsea, like Newcastle, and even Tottenham, they still have to maintain their spot as well, even in 5th or, with the 5% chance, I believe, that they can get 4th. But that's sort of how we can contextualize things for Game Week 36. Overall, it was a good week. I'm very happy to be back within the top 5K. So sitting around 3,063 in the world right now. Heading towards Game Week 37, obviously we're going to be bench boosting, so you'll see a little bit more of an extended defense and, of course, 2 goalkeepers this week. My plan is to go out from Flecken into Nick Pope. I'm hoping that Nick Pope is ready to play. Now, if Pope is not ready to play, I said it's a very simple decision. We just don't go for Pope at all. I think the alternative decision is to go for Onana. Now, I know this sounds horrible, and I know it sounds like it doesn't make any sense because we have just seen United play versus Crystal Palace, and we've just seen Onana play. We've just seen Casemiro and Evans as a partnership, but I still think ultimately as a keeper, you will have a lot of chances to make saves. When you look at, for example, the context of the season and all the goalkeepers that have played, United have consistently been a bottom five sort of defensive team. However, Onana is still doing extremely well for points, right? He's actually fourth, right behind Raya, Leno, and Pickford. So it actually already tells me that over the course of the season, we can have some faith that Onana can still do well in spite of how bad United look at the back end. And I think that's just something that we can say outright is just true right now. He is your classic, makes a lot of saves goalkeeper. Obviously, he makes a lot of mistakes as well. But over the course of the season, he's actually been a positive shot stopper. So that's something that's been quite interesting. And that's obviously a huge benefit because, boy, do I think Man United will concede a lot of shots this week. As far as Nick Pope, of course, I think he's the preferred option because I still think when it comes to clean sheet odds, it much favors Newcastle, even over, let's say, the likes of Spurs, who continue to look like a worsening defense, whereas Newcastle, I think, has at least flatlined a little bit. Not so bad as Spurs, who continue to fall. Same with United, who continue to fall, or even Brighton as well. All these three teams, I feel like, have continued to skid, and I can't access Chelsea without taking a -4. So Gusto, of course, is a blocker in my team, and I don't really want to go to Petrovic for a -4. I just don't think it's necessary this week when I can go for a goalkeeper who doubles instead with one free transfer. So that's the plan. We're going to go from Flecken to either Pope or Onana, and then Vicario, who obviously we've kept for a while. Hopefully he gets to redeem himself in game week 37 here with a clean sheet. That would be the ideal situation. Of course, when we look at game week 37, it's a mix of two fixtures, right? A really good fixture versus Burnley, who are still obviously going to attack given their position within the league table, and then a City fixture where, let's be honest, we're hoping for saves more than anything. And I think the City team have been absolutely electric recently. So they really are in peak shape. And Spurs, you can argue, have been at their absolute worst, right? Not only on offense, but also specifically on defense. And that's not a great sign for Vicario, but, we've made it here with Vicario in our team. We might as well persist with a double game week. And then Sheffield United away from home, not exactly the worst fixture to end the season. And then in the defensive line, we have Gabriel and Saliba. Obviously, these are single game week players, but the idea behind keeping Arsenal is just simply that I think that they can actually match the standards and the levels of some of the other teams in this week, right? When I compare, let's say, Saliba to Gabriel, or Saliba and Gabriel and White, for example, to your Dunks of the world, your Websters of the world, I really do think that it can run really close. Some of the Newcastle players for this week as well, some of the fullbacks like Livramento, like Hall, I think maybe their minutes could be a little bit worse. I tend to think, for example, Hall has better minutes than Livramento, just because if Trippier comes back, I think that unlike in the beginning of the season, I don't think Livramento will automatically displace Hall in the left back position because he's been playing quite well in there. So that's sort of my thought right now on Arsenal defense. I don't see a reason to take them out, and I would say that the same logic obviously holds for people who have kept their Everton defenders, right? Your Pickfords of the worlds and your Branthwaites of the worlds, or even your Tarkovskis, who have Sheffield United at home. That's such a great fixture. I wouldn't pass up the opportunity to play them. And especially with this United team, with Bruno being a little bit of a doubt, with, of course, United just looking horrendous at the back, which obviously has a lot of impacts, right? The worse you are at the back, the worse you are in the midfield. I mean, the worse your offense is going to be. There has to be some sort of link up. And with United, I think they're so bottom bad that really, I think there's a great chance here for an Arsenal clean sheet. And obviously, we've seen Arsenal play extremely well as a defensive team away from home. So not too unconfident about actually bench boosting triple Arsenal. So I've got Gusto still, and I think Gusto is probably the player that I think is the worst player actually within my defense. We can't guarantee his minutes necessarily, and I don't think he's going to get 2 starts, but I still think he will get 1. And that's sort of the hope that I'm holding on to. Ultimately, when I compare Gusto to Pau, I think Gusto has a better singular fixture, both fixtures, to be honest. And when I compare Gusto to Flecken, who was my previous keeper before I would have technically transferred to Pope or Onana, I just think that Flecken is versus Bournemouth at home or away from home. And Gusto, of course, has 2 away fixtures, Brighton and Nottingham Forest. I like the chances that I can maybe gamble on Gusto, plus hopefully he just gets an appearance point within one of those fixtures, which is already good enough for me as a Gusto owner. And that's sort of the chance that I'm going to take. Hopefully he gets to play 1 game and that's it. As far as Pau, of course, he has to leave and he leaves for Pedro Porro. Now, I'm not 100% sure about whether I will go for Pedro Porro. I do think maybe a double up of Spurs defense isn't exactly ideal, but I think you can make the argument for all the defenses that I can't access, right? I can't access a Chelsea defense. I can't access a City defense because I already own Guardiola and Gusto. So the way I see it, right, when even going back to the clean sheets, Newcastle, Brighton, and United all have terrible fixtures, and it's very hard to choose between them. Now, I could obviously go for an Everton defender or an Everton goalkeeper as well, but I also just like to, play my hand at the lottery. So I tend to prefer my double game week players. It's not like a Sheffield United clean sheet is absolutely guaranteed. Another thing to mention too is that Everton are technically on the beach as well because they've sort of secured themselves from relegation. Obviously, this is a home game, so that's very significant for Everton. So I wouldn't, say that Everton are going to down tools, but the idea here, of course, is that maybe their need to reinforce what has been an incredible home defense, as they've shown recently, isn't as essential as it was maybe 2 weeks ago, and that's all I'm trying to say. So the way I see it is that Pedro Porro ultimately still has a Burnley at home fixture. Maddison is also getting benched plenty, and the way I like that is because the more Maddison gets benched, the better Pedro Porro is as an attacking asset. And we also know that Pedro Porro, out of all the fullbacks, is going to be the more consistent attacking option. Romero has had a really hard time at left back. Pedro Porro, of course, maybe you could argue will have more defensive responsibilities because of how weak the midfield looks for Spurs as well. But to take my chances here with Porro still makes sense to me. Now, if let's say Pope is not ready to play, if we find out that Dubravka is going to start in Gaming 37, of course, there's a world where I won't have triple Newcastle. And maybe the question can be instead, if I don't go Porro, can I go for Dan Burn instead and add Onana to that team? I think there's a possibility that I will consider that, to be honest. And part of that is because I still think if I was to, let's say, compare Newcastle to Spurs and to United and Brighton, I think probably Newcastle defense is the defense that I would say have better chances of clean sheets. And then maybe Spurs, and then I would say United and Brighton maybe level with the worst chances. So not really considering their defense unless it's a goalkeeper. And of course, with Verbruggen, it's very hard to justify that anyways. So Onana is really my only option. And then I can consider between Dan Burn and Porro. Dan Burn obviously being a set piece threat in terms of being, on the receiving end of that threat. And then Porro, of course, the deliverer of chances, someone who I think can benefit given that Maddison has really missed out a lot of minutes recently from this team. What is sad, I suppose, of course, is that it's not like necessarily the people deputizing over Maddison have played extremely well. So Maddison always has roots back into the team. And that obviously, in a way, makes Pedro Porro an inherently worse asset. So we'll have to see what happens there. But I do like the punt on Porro. It's also a little bit of a shield move, to be honest, because I think Pedro Porro has higher ownership. So I will reconsider whether I think I want to chase, because I think I've got a real opportunity here of getting into the top 1K. And as I said, of course, Trippier is still somewhat on the radar. So if Trippier, for example, somehow gets confirmed to start versus Brighton because somehow he looks brilliant in training for whatever reason by Eddie Howe, I'm all over that move, and I'll go for Onana as well off the back of that. So that's just the context for the defense. And then Guardiola, of course, the absolute ace within my team for the last 2 weeks, who's been the gift that keeps on giving. And definitely I think I will be purchasing his t-shirt very, very quickly. But Guardiola is going to stay within the team, and I'm very excited about owning Guardiola this week, particularly since a lot of people still don't own Guardiola. I think half the field maybe doesn't, and hopefully not too many people have the opportunity to move into Guardiola because they're already set within Triple City. In the midfield this week, we're going with Saka, Foden, Palmer, Gordon, and Son. These were the players that we actually decided to stick with as a midfield 2 weeks ago when we took the -16. No reason to change them now. Gordon is still on set pieces up until Trippier comes back. Of course, if Trippier comes back, that makes Gordon slightly worse as a pick, but I have to say that this Newcastle attack looks absolutely fantastic, right? Even if at times you can say that right now they're playing a 4-4-2 and maybe Gordon's sort of playing a left mid role, I still think he gets plenty of chances. He also still whips in with an open play, plenty of great crosses that help advance and progress the play, but also actually could be final actions, right? So very confident about Newcastle going forwards and Gordon as well as a pick. He's just been very good this season. And also I think his guarantee of minutes when Newcastle need points. So for example, when Newcastle have absolutely blown a team out of the water, that's the only chance when Gordon really comes off the field. If Gordon is part of a Newcastle team that is down, for example, looking for a goal, he's always going to be part of that team. And I think that's very significant about his importance within the team. Palmer, Son, and Foden, really, you could put the same arguments to all three of these players. So really, it's a question of whether you want to go for differential captaincy with any of these players. With Saka, I think a lot of people will be considering going for Richarlison. As I said, of course, my defense probably needs the most amount of help that it can get. I think with Richarlison, it doesn't feel so good moving out of any of the doublers in my team, and it doesn't really feel good at all going from Saka to Richarlison, because the way I like Saka within my team is that I think he's exceptional to hold over Gaming 37 now because United just look like they're in absolute tatters, but also Gaming 38, he's just going to be a great differential. So no reason to get him out of my team and do a hokey cokey, in my opinion, when Richarlison is also a little bit of a coin flip, right? If I was in the position of owning Bruno and I was unsure about his fitness, I would consider Richarlison a little bit more because that Burnley at home game where I think 95, 99% chance he starts is much more appetizing for such an owner, right? Particularly if you own, let's say, a Garnacho as well, where United overall just looks so poor, you're not expecting much even over the double. Whereas with Arsenal, I think this is such an important game for them. United are at their absolute worst. Now, of course, we can expect some Old Trafford heroics here, but I'm still very confident about Saka as a pick. And then in the front line here, we're just going to round out with Jackson, Haaland, Isak, an extremely template front line. Maybe I'll make a change towards it in Game Week 38 when we have the chance to target United once again with João Pedro. I'm not so sure about that right now, but that's something definitely that I've sort of kept open within my mind as an option to go for. But right now the team does look very good with the bench boost intact. And we have effectively 3 singlers here within Arsenal. I would say 4 singlers if I'm being honest. I don't think Gusto's going to start 2 games. So 4 singlers as part of the bench boost, but a great game for Arsenal. And ultimately a good chance of a little bit more of a positive from our singler here, final one in Gusto. So that's going to be the bench boost. Thank you guys so much for watching the team selection. The captaincy will be on Haaland. I'm not going to go into why I'm going for Haaland. It just makes sense. City have everything to play for, and they need to win these 2 games. Haaland will hopefully help them achieve their objective and achieve my objective in getting FPL points like he did last week. And thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys soon. Take care and goodbye.